Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our session this afternoon, Disaster and Crisis Preparedness for Destinations and Venues. My name is Liz Dombrowski. I'm the Certification Manager here at Events Industry Council. I'm going to just cover a few brief housekeeping notes before we go ahead and get started with our panel. So just as a reminder, we do have some functionality here in Zoom we just wanted to refresh on. Please post your questions in the Q&A panel below and use upvoting throughout the session. That's how we know what questions are most significant for our panelists. They'll do their best to answer every single one. You can also chat with your peers through the chat function or reach out to the panelists directly. We are offering closed captioning for this session. So to turn that on, again, go to that panel at the bottom and then click on closed caption and show subtitle. And that will start for you. As a reminder, we are recording this session. We will be posting the recording afterwards, and those who join us live today will earn 1 hour of continuing education, and your CE will be posted to your Events Industry Council account within about a week. So thank you so much. I'm now going to turn things over to our moderator, David. David?
Good afternoon. Thank you very much, Liz. My name is David Audrain. I'm the Executive Director of the Society of Independent Show Organizers. I also am CEO and partner of a for-profit show organizing business called Expo DevCo, and I'm here to moderate this afternoon's session. So thank you very much for being part of it. Just brief introductions of our panelists. We have Cathy Breden, who's the Executive Vice President and COO of the International Association for Exhibitions and Events. Mayne, President and CEO of the International Association of Venue Managers. Miguel Naranjo, the Program Officer for Climate Neutral Now Lead, the UN Climate Change. And Don Welsh, President and CEO of Destinations International. Welcome everybody to this afternoon's session. We are talking about disaster and crisis preparedness for destinations and venues, as was mentioned. And I have a couple of first questions to get this rolling. For Brad, to start with, can you just give us an overview of how venues are being affected right now by COVID-19?
Sure. Thank you, David. As we know, there are a lot of hotspots for the COVID-19 virus, and it has had a major effect on the communities. In those communities, the ban on mass gatherings has had an enormous effect on the venues across the globe. Venues have experienced event cancellations, but many events are being postponed, with most of those events being rescheduled into the last 2 quarters of 2020 and the first quarter of 2021. Should mass gatherings begin in the 3rd quarter, the industry will experience a condensed number of events in the near future, putting a strain on event spaces, equipment, and other resources. It's possible the industry will experience lower event attendance as the world strives to get back to normal, which we all have to take into account. Without events, our venues' revenues are 70% of those revenues are non-existent. So the organizers are cutting operating expenses, or the organizations, and venue staff are taking a financial hit in most cases. Part-time employees are not working. Full-time staff is being furloughed, taking a cut in compensation, and some venues have laid off the majority of their workforce. So it's a little bit across the board. Most of those venue professionals who are working are sheltered in their homes, which is unusual for venue managers, obviously dealing with mass gatherings. So they're learning how to function from a remote workplace, and many are working fewer hours. Silver lining in this scenario for those individuals allows them to do online learning, work on updating policies and procedures, and focusing on how to ramp up to host events when it is safe to allow people to gather. As you can imagine, professionals will have to plan for many options to reopen the venues, anywhere from very slow pace all the way up to an accelerated pace, when we all find out how restrictions will be eased, hopefully in the very near future, obviously. Venues understand that it will be a coordinated effort of the global hospitality industry to respond to opening their doors for events in the future. And this is where EIC and its member organizations will be playing an important role of coordinating efforts for the event industry. So thank you, EIC, for taking leadership on that. Venues that have ability are using this downtime to do specific maintenance, and if already funded, they're handling capital projects they could not accomplish under normal schedules. So another silver lining. On another note, many of the venues have become a greater asset to their community, having been repurposed by federal and local authorities for other uses. Venues are using IAVM's Mega Shelter Guidebook to assist in the repurposing of venues to aid in the fight against this pandemic. Not only are they assisting in the fight against the virus, some of our venues are serving commercial corporations within their community as well. So let's talk a little bit about the different uses that our members or our venues are repurposed to serve agencies. They include becoming a hospital. The hospital number of beds ranges anywhere from 465 to 12,744 medical beds. They're also being used for healthcare facility and medical shelter for non-COVID patients, allowing the hospitals to do what they do best. They are testing stations. They are centers for blood donations. They are homeless shelter so that individuals on the street can shelter in place. And they're logistic hubs. For example, some of them have become command centers, some of them food banks. They become material supply distribution centers. They are a logistics hub for first responders. We even have some of our venues that are being used for biohazard decontamination for responder equipment and rigs. It's one of the things that's nice about our big buildings is the ambulance can drive right in. Decontamination efforts can be made and get them back on the road again as opposed to having to drive back to their home base. So, and then also for medical care donations. As you know, a lot of individuals want to be involved in helping with this. So different organizations have set up locations where they can make donations of PPEs and other items. Venues that have been repurposed to serve commercial organizations, which, you know, you wouldn't think about that, but parking areas in our venues are allowing storage of rental cars and for service vehicles. So as you think about it, those rental cars and service vehicles are usually on the road, but with the shelter-in-place scenarios, those vehicles are shuttered just like many of our venues are and have to have a place that is safe and convenient. So I know there's a lot more that we could talk about, but I think those are the highlights of things that are happening to our venues.
Great. Thanks, Brad. Yes, we'll come back to some specific questions, I know, a little later on. Don, can you talk about how the destinations are being impacted right now?
My pleasure. First of all, thank you, David. Thank you, EIC. And it's nice to be on the phone today with such great partners. And we have a chance to work under normal conditions with Brad and his team and many others. So thank you. You know, just a little background. We have 600 members plus in 13 countries. And I will say that at any given time, there's a challenge taking place within a respective destination in a country. But clearly, COVID-19 has been the equalizer for all. It is, no matter where you are in the world right now with any of our partners, they are experiencing this challenge to unprecedented levels. And I think it gets back to some of the things we've been working with our members. And as you know, Amy came from our world, so I think she understands the true impact and correlation between the EIC community and the destination. So I truly appreciate her support since taking this position. But yeah, I think what we've been focusing with our members for the last year plus is really making sure that their community shared value position in terms of being a community asset, not just externally to the tourism community or to the event meeting planner industry, but really making their impact known in the local community. And it is truly, I could give you 50 examples right now, but I won't out of the sake of the time today. But if you look at the what's taking place, I'll give you a few. In Banff and Lake Louise in Canada right now, they were ready to still finish out the spring season, but they had 180 seasonal employees, as an example, living on mountains in their remote locations, and they found temporary housing for them. In the case of Rockford in Illinois, smaller destination, they have begun becoming the daily repository for information being exchanged to local legislators in their community. And they've actually now have a community weekly lunch where they allow local citizens to call and find out what's taking place within their community. In the case of Puerto Rico, who has had their share of challenges, not only have they been resolved and they're dealing with these, but they've also now come up with something that is now called the virtual vacation. And it is applying to locals at home as well as others, and it really is live videos that travelers can access and to talk about, including a salsa dance, cocktail class, and things we're all looking to provide a little entertainment. We just finished our U.S. CEO webinar just prior to this one, and in Dallas, as an example, we're finding out that a lot of healthcare workers around the world are not leaving the hospitals or their premises because of concerns about impacting their families and loved ones. So they're sleeping in their cars. They're staying with one another in hospitals. So in many communities, we're sort of taking the lead within the local community to activate availability of hotel rooms for healthcare workers to be able to take advantage of, either complimentary or discounted. And I'm pleased to see that Hilton has done a global program, as well as Marriott. And in destinations like Niagara, they've come up with what's called the Destin of Hope, where, again, it's a repository of data for that community. So I could go on, but I'm proud of the work that we're doing. The challenges change daily and frequently, but again, with a lot of coordination with many of the people on this call today and others, I think the industry is galvanizing like I've not seen it before. So just a little update on how destinations are responding.
Thanks, Don. Let's say we've read a lot about the activities of a lot of the venues and a lot of the cities and the hotels out there, especially trying to help first responders, which is terrific to see. One question, Don, on with the destinations right now, how challenging is it with all the rescheduled events going on, and how are the sales teams in those destinations working towards both rescheduling the events from right now, but also dealing with requests for future events?
Great question, David, and I'll answer two parts to that question. Unfortunately, a lot of destinations right now, because in this $2 trillion CARES package that has passed, unfortunately, most destinations in the U.S. operate under a nonprofit 501c6. Some are 501c3s. If you're a C3, your access to the funds is much easier, more readily available, and that is allowing destinations who have this, and again, the U.S., to be a little bit more sustained in their operation and not have to make the furloughs and cuts that have been made. Many of our members, including us, fall within that C6 category, David. So you're seeing in many places right now extensive furloughs. Certain destinations have furloughed 80-90% of their staff right now. So that sort of segues to part two of your my response to your question, and that is that destinations right now understand that they've been dealing with cancellations and postponements. We're beginning to see right now, we were pleased to hear, as an example, last month, $1.1 billion worth of leads moved through the C-Bank channel, as an example. So we're really pleased and thankful to those on the phone right now that are still conducting business, not to the volumes you've done before, but I think we're understanding the role of the destination, David, will be as business starts to get booked into the future. We're seeing a lot of activity in the fourth quarter of 2020, and I know right now people are trying to reaccommodate meetings, but there will be space limitations. 21 is looking great for business, but I mean between the destination working with their hotel partners in their community and of course with Brad teams If the venue's involved, there's this cooperative effort. But we're hearing from many hotel companies, they're asking for more of the lead generation to be sent, at least copied to the destination, because in some cases the volume of business can't be handled at the hotel level. So again, it's sort of causing, necessity is causing now everybody to work closer as a team, and the destination clearly wants to be a viable part of that. So we want to be part of the solution.
Super. Thanks, Don. We'll get back, I'm sure, on some other topics on that. Switching a little bit to the impact of climate. Miguel, with COVID-19 being top of mind right now, how are we doing in terms of maintaining a long-term focus on climate action? And how likely is it that we'll see a rise in the climate-related disasters that may require venues and destinations to take on those roles as emergency shelters as they've done before?
Thanks a lot. Well, definitely at this time the focus has to be on health and recovery. That is completely understandable. It's an immediate necessity. But we also have to understand that climate change means potential impacts that will be much harder than what we are seeing right now with COVID-19 in the very near future. So at the same time that we are working towards recovering from this, we have to be keeping an eye on what we are doing to address climate. In terms of disasters, the second part of your question, the science of attribution of the disasters to climate change, so being able to say if a given disaster is related to climate change or not, has advanced a lot in the last years. And what it tells us basically is that we see definitely a rise in the number and in the severity of the disasters associated to climate change. We have had billions of dollars of losses, economic losses in the last years, with only a $6 billion investment in prevention, in preparedness. It has been estimated that's in the next 15 years, $6 billion. We can avoid $150 billion of economic impact. Now, if $6 billion seems like a lot, maybe you want to consider that every year governments provide in the form of subsidies to fossil fuels approximately $5 trillion. So we're talking $6 billion investment along 15 years. We're giving $5 trillion per year to fossil fuels. And so definitely we have a huge opportunity to address our impact on climate, and we really need it. Over 75% of all disasters, natural disasters that happen are related to climate. And we do understand now that definitely there is an increase in the number and in the severity of those impacts. So it's really important to keep an eye on climate.
Yes, thank you. And I live in the southeast, and we just got hit with a whole bunch of tornadoes down here just this week. So the weather isn't stopping for COVID-19, unfortunately. We'll come back to some more on that, I'm sure, Miguel. But Cathy, again, at this time, how do we maintain a focus on sustainability when we're in the middle of such a significant crisis right now? You're muted, Cathy.
Thank you, David, and thanks to EIC for putting together this program. I was just on the GMID virtual program earlier, and they had a really good attendance there as well. So really appreciate this time for all of us to come together. Just a little bit about IAEE. We're the International Association of Exhibitions and Events. So we represent the trade shows and consumer event organizers. We have about 1,300 member organizations representing about 12,000 individuals from 52 countries. And, you know, one of the things that we talk about a lot, and I think all of us as event planners would agree, is that, you know, what we do really changes the world. It uplifts economies, it generates commerce, it contributes to the economic impact both globally and locally. So, you know, it is incredibly important what it is that we do. And because we do change the world in the way that we do, we have to remember that when we're designing our events, we have to keep this in mind. When I was preparing for this, I found an article in McKinsey Quarterly that really resonated with me. The title of it's Addressing Climate Change in a Post-Pandemic World. Encourage you all to go out and find that on McKinsey website. But one of the things that we have seen certainly is that climate change has taken a backseat to COVID and what's happening today. And, I think that there are three questions that we can ask ourselves. What are the lessons that we can learn from this crisis? And what are the implications of our pandemic response? What does that hold for climate action? And then what steps can we take to align our response? So I think out of this, there are some lessons learned. And the biggest lesson, I think for me, is that crisis and the crisis of climate change, which are both, physical shocks to us currently, but they're both huge global health crises. And, if you look at it, the similarities of the timescales of both occurrences, right? COVID, for instance, has taken us just weeks to get to where we are now, whereas with the climate, it's taken us years to get to where we are now. And with climate, we've been aware of this for a long time. COVID, just the last several months, for instance. And with COVID, we were blindsided by that. Couldn't really have prepared for it. Maybe could have prepared for it a little bit better. But in terms of climate, certainly we've had that on our radar for years and years and years. So we don't want to get caught, and I think we are getting caught in the fact that we're not paying enough attention to climate. The rising temps, just as an example, creates favorable conditions for disease-bearing illnesses like malaria and dengue fever. So, those types of things that it helps us to realize that we really do need to pay attention to climate. So for the business events industry, what might we be able to do differently or plan for now? I think, the venues are doing a really good job, lead buildings now. They're sourcing local foods. They're growing their own foods, being very, very responsive. So I would then turn around and urge all of the event planners, event organizers to consider how might you be able to do, put in your part as well. We're really going to need to rebuild this industry once all this is over, and this recovery is going to have a long, long trail. It's going to take a long time to get us back to where we were last year, but at the same time, it gives us the opportunity to rebuild something better by making design decisions that are climate friendly. So, what's going to happen out of this crisis? Might there be more telecommuting? Quite honestly, I work in the office 5 days a week. I actually perform a little bit better there, I think. But over the past 3 weeks, I've accommodated myself. I'm adjusted to working here at home, and I think that it's and with Zoom now, I talk with the staff more now than I ever have. So what might we be able to do in allowing staff to work from home? A lot more frequently, if not full time. And I think that this really came into play when I live about a kilometer away from a major highway, and it's usually a dull roar when you walk outside, and now it's quiet when you walk outside. You can hear the birds chirping, and it's just really nice. So EIC, they have great sustainability practices on their website. I encourage everybody to go out there. It's not just about climate change. It's also about collaborations and partnerships, which I think that is one of the things that I'm most proud about being in this industry, and all of the industry organizations, regardless of whether it's DI or IBM or SISO, the whole acronym of what we call the MICE industry. We're very, very collaborative and look at creating partnerships. And I think this is another issue through EIC and the 33 member organizations that I think that we'll be able to tackle a little bit more closely together. But, at the same time, it's as I said, it's become quite apparent that Climate change is not going to go away, and we as an industry need to work together to make sure that that our futures are bright. When looking at what happened just over the last couple of weeks, Beijing, their nitrogen dioxide levels dropped by about 36%. And in New York, carbon emissions are down by 50% over last year. Italy's down. So environmentally and social economically, it's imperative for us to think about what is it that we're going to do to bring the event industry into more of a carbon neutral, climate neutral way of doing business. So I will leave it there, David, and turn it back over to you.
Thanks, Cathy. And yes, our company has, as you know, for over 8 years now, all 17 of our employees have been working from home 100% of the time. So I suspect after this last month or so, we'll see more and more companies doing similar things as we go forward on that. There's a couple more questions. I'll come back to you and Miguel on particularly on that. But the next section I wanted to talk about, Don, what are some of the lessons that have already been learned from past economic and natural disasters that are providing guidance right now?
Thank you, David. Picking up really on one of Cathy's points, I think it wasn't too long ago where we saw that in Cape Town, they went through the whole public situation of having a water shortage. And that clearly had a setback on tourism and meetings being held in that country. But they really, I think, began working together cooperatively with government. They found unique, innovative solutions to deal with it. And to be honest with you, I don't think there will ever be an oversupply of water in that part of the world. But the reality is they collectively addressed it and fixed it. And they did communicate it to all the interested parties. I talked about Puerto Rico in terms of what they've done. And I have such admiration for Breden and his team and those that were there before him that have dealt with storms and major hurricanes coming through that have just devastated it. But their resilience there and rebuilding and finding resources and getting back really in all elements of the tourism game, both meetings and tourism. I was thinking about Las Vegas, and many of you on the call book business in Las Vegas, and to see right now that the Strip is totally shut down. It's dark. I used to work in Las Vegas, and I will tell you that the only time it ever went dark was in honor of Frank Sinatra on his passing. So to see that sustained period of time where it's dark, I do believe that Las Vegas will be one of the true bellwether markets. So when it is safe to travel and hold meetings, I do believe they're going to be one of the first to rebound back. But I look at the way Las Vegas responded from the Mandalay Bay shootings. So I think our destinations have become pretty versed in terms of whether it is an act of terrorism, whether it is a natural disaster. They're beginning to be the experts as to the go-to for that community, both when it's taken place and post-recovery. So they become the true, I guess, source of information and unbiased information and data. So when you're contemplating a meeting, again, the work that's being done in the community is alive and well. And, as I said to you today, we've been having weekly CEO updates with our partners in the U.S. and Canada. And they're mobilizing really on a daily basis. But this COVID, as everyone has talked about, is thrown a different global opportunity for solutions. And I'm just so proud of the work that's being done to collectively address it, both short-term and long-term. But I could give you countless examples, David, of the way destinations have dealt with a crisis and collectively gotten back on their feet. And I'm proud of the resilience of our industry. And it wouldn't be resilient if it didn't have customers that are on this phone today that believe in the community and wind up booking business in those communities.
Thanks, Don. I appreciate that. Cathy, how are the exhibition industry's service suppliers adapting? What are they doing right now?
You could probably answer that better than I could, David. I'm going to first address the organizers, and then I'll address the suppliers. But certainly for the organizers, looking at when they're going to be able to hold their events. It's a very scary, very concerning situation. According to the Center for Exhibition Industry Research, tracking the number of postponed versus canceled events, and we're holding at about 60% have been canceled and 40% are being rescheduled, hopefully this year. So I agree with Don. I think the fall is going to be a very, very busy time if we are able to meet again. And, if people are feeling comfortable about meeting again in large crowds. So they're doing a lot of different scenarios, different forecasting, just like the destinations, there have been a lot of layoffs and furloughs and salary reductions trying to make it through. And a lot of them are looking at, how do they move to virtual? Is it going, or what about a digital trade show experience? And is that something that their exhibitors and their attendees are going to want to participate in? I think that for those organizations where there are licensing requirements for physicians, for instance, or CPAs, where people have to license, renew their licenses, those types of events where it is, attending webinars and courses that way, that is, that's a real possibility of eroding, that live event. But at the same time, I look at it, even from IAEE's perspective, we have been holding all these webinars for our members at no cost. We've opened up webinars to non-members, but, will our members ever want to pay for the great education that we're offering now through our webinars that we might have offered, through some other live events? So I think there's a ground shift going on. It'll be interesting to see what type of different experiences will be designed from this experience. And then in terms of the service partners, they've been hit really, really badly. The contractors, lots and lots of layoffs and furloughs. Talked with a major contractor this morning that just went through another round. It's a very sad situation that people's lives are being upended the way that they are. Certainly we are seeing that the contractors and, the exhibit designers and builders, they were brought in to build the temporary structures for the hospitals at the different venues. But a lot of them are trying to restructure and refocus and get prepared for when the recovery begins.
Thanks, Cathy. Talking about the future, Brad, can you talk a little bit more about IAVM's Mega Shelters project, how the work's being done, and give us a little more detail on the guidance of how that's going to go forward and how that impacts the venues opening back up again?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. I do want to say something. Don talked about Las Vegas. Our partners, our members, MGM, visiting with one of their senior vice presidents here recently, brought something up that I had never thought about. I asked him the question about it must look like a ghost town not being open. And he said, Brad, have you ever thought that our casinos are a 365-day, 24-hour-a-day operation, and our doors do not have locks? So, some learning experiences for all of us in so many different ways. And I do appreciate the collaboration with all of the other associations in the MICE industry. It's been phenomenal, and that's how we're going to get through this. You asked me about our Mega Shelter program. IAVM and the American Red Cross collaborated together back in 2006 to enhance the planning processes and preparedness for the Mega Shelter, utilizing lessons learned from a series of devastating incidents. Initially, we published these guides back in 2006. which has served and assisted multiple public venue communities. While the guide was implemented, additional planning work was undertaken by the American Red Cross and FEMA and many other agencies in collaboration to update the Mega Shelter program. The guideline has been updated a few times. We actually, prior to this pandemic, was working with the EIC to once again update it. And now that we're undergoing this pandemic, IVM, under our Director of Education, Mark Herrera, has put together working groups, and we are creating additional procedures and programs to directly address pandemics, something that we really hadn't had to deal with. But this guide is a comprehensive program to formulate and implement plans and procedures in setting up a shelter for individuals who have lost their homes in devastating incidents. Major storms, such as, talking about the climate changes, major storms such as hurricanes, cyclones, flooding, fires, now pandemics, and other calamities that affect a large area of a particular community. Residents of mega shelters are individuals and families who have been displaced from their homes, possessions, neighborhoods, and quite possibly jobs and sources of income. When planning for the shelter in place in these incidents, we consider the perspective and the needs of the residents who may have become devoid of the core familiar infrastructure that supported their daily life. Mega sheltering provides an interim replacement for the basic needs of the residents until they and or their community is able to support and return to normal systems. As you can imagine, shelters of this size and magnitude function as small cities and demand elements of government and community support that keep such cities safe and well. They become multi-agency programs with venues serving a central and important role. So in collaboration with all the other organizations that have to be involved. And typically no one agency or organization opens and operates any one of these sites on its own. The Mega Shelter Planning Guide provides the methodology to update procedures and practices and to continually improve the service and operation. Knowing that each shelter response is unique, this guide provides for tools to initiate the planning process while acknowledging the criteria necessary for successful operations. So just talking about some of the things that are found in the guide, it includes planning for registration of the residents to know who we're dealing with, obviously security and venue access, parking and traffic flow, public information, public affairs, media relations. They become a hub for the communities to know what's happening and how we're serving the communities. Dormitory management, food service, public, medical, and mental health, spiritual care, children's area, pet sheltering, entertainment and recreation, IT services, recovery information and resident messaging, family reunification, which obviously may take place, distribution of goods, donation and volunteer management, and public and private sector coordination, and much, much more. We're now working with a group, just actually happened yesterday and today, for pandemic logistics. The COVID working group that Mark has put together, working with the CDC, Department of Homeland Security, and other organizations in putting something together that will mimic and become a part of the Mega Shelter program. We're working with American Red Cross, FEMA, and we now have a lead with a global partner that is creating a certification program for cleaning biohazards to join the update process. So academics, scientists, and the like, creating a certification program not only for the professionals in the industry, but also for the companies that they work for. We don't have the pricing put together yet, but it's something that there should be a major announcement tomorrow as to who is joining these efforts in collaboration. And, we're looking forward to continuing to update our programs and logistics in any way that we can, obviously in cooperation with everybody in the hospitality industry.
Super, thanks, Brad. Miguel, on this preparing for the future side again, what resources exist from the UN or are needed to better equip the events industry to respond to crises like this?
Well, thanks a lot. I like that question because it's the practical side, right? We already know that climate change is a challenge. We have 10 years left, and I always like to mention this. We have potentially 10 years left before we reach 1.5 degrees Celsius of global warming, which is the limit that we don't want to reach, beyond which the impacts of climate change are probably going to be too big, too difficult to handle for our whole society. So we are talking here about the future, the continuity of our society as such, and within our society, of course, of your business as well. What Brad was just mentioning is an excellent way to think about the future and the resources that we will need. Imagine that Europe has had a very hard time in the last few years dealing with a million or so refugees coming from Syria mainly and other countries in the Middle East, and Europe being a relatively well-off society, resourceful society. What are we going to do if by the end of the century or earlier you have 2 meters of sea level rise and you need to relocate 1 billion people? What are we going to do there? Do we have enough mega shelters? Will we have enough mega shelters for 1 billion climate refugees? Right. Most of the participants here, I think, are from North America. So imagine, for example, Florida, Louisiana, or Yucatan in Mexico, all the low-lying areas gone. Definitely, the resources that are needed are potentially huge. And it makes much more sense to act now to avoid getting there than to have to face the impacts in the near future. COVID is, topic of the day. Imagine that we know in the permafrost in northern Russia, in the northern part of Europe and Asia, there are viruses that have been latent there for the last 10,000 years, to which we have probably no defense because we have not been in touch with them. And as the permafrost melts because of global warming, they may be released. So COVID may be just one of a few to come in the future. So the situation is really difficult. We really need to act now to address climate, and we cannot forget that as we come out of COVID. In terms of resources then, there are plenty of resources out there if there is the will. What Brad was just mentioning in terms of mega shelters is an excellent example for those who manage venues. But looking at the broader picture, maybe we start with the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. These are the goals that we as a global society have decided we want to reach by 2030, and they provide a framework to organize our actions. And the EIC has already done a lot of very good work on the sustainability standards and on other pieces of work to align or to try to help the industry align with the SDGs. So the EIC is one of the first resources to go to, and we are trying to set up a closer collaboration with EIC as well to put more focus on the urgency of the climate action. So hopefully we'll have that. Then going beyond that, the UN Disaster Risk Reduction Agency also has a few activities or a few initiatives that may be interesting. For destinations, for example, there is the Resilient Cities initiative, where they should be talking very closely with you if they are not already. So you can coordinate at city level or destination level. And for everybody else, as individual organizations, they have Arise. This is another initiative to try to involve the private sector in responding to disaster. And they have also developed some very good resources, and very importantly, a network also of like-minded organizations. And this is something very important that Cathy mentioned, and I think all of you actually have mentioned, is collaboration. This is the key. We are not going to address climate change or any of the other global challenges that we have by acting alone, only by working together. So I would invite you to even think beyond your industry. It's excellent to hear how closely you are coordinating within the industry. This is very inspiring, of course. Now, remember to look outside. There are so many others outside that can help the industry and that you can help with your experience, with your knowledge. We do need to work together globally, even beyond your industry, to address the interests of your industry. So those are some of the resources that I am aware of, but I'm sure that there are many more.
Thanks, Miguel. And it should be pointed out that a lot of this information is available at the Events Industry Council's website in the sustainability section, yes? Great.
Exactly, yes.
Okay, going to some of the questions that have come up. Brad, for you, one of the first ones here was a request, are there technical guidelines that can be followed for points of entry at the venues and mass gatherings, waste management, food and beverage?
Yeah, and as you can imagine, every venue has got different aspects to deal with. Whether or not they're a union house where people are normally set up to enter and the like. We do have resources on the iavm.org website, but obviously security is an important aspect of that, as well as operating in a way that is efficient for everybody. Sometimes some of these scenarios are a challenge based on the event flow and what the building is being used for. So yes, there are technical guidelines that we have, and any specific questions about that, we'd be happy to answer.
Great. So they can go to the IAVM website for it.
Yes.
Super. Thank you. Miguel, back to you. Further question, has this lockdown these last few weeks around the world affected the climate overall in a positive way?
Yes, thanks. I saw that one. Well, the short-term effects, yes, there is a positive effect on the greenhouse gas emissions that we produce and which cause global warming and then climate change. So as a result of COVID, because there is less activity from the transport sector, you know it very well from your industry with air travel, etc., but also from many industries and private transportation, cars, public transportation as well, you see a significant reduction in the emissions of greenhouse gases. However, these effects are expected to be short-lived. As soon as we start the recovery from COVID-19, levels will go up. And the danger is that because priority will be given to economic recovery, the danger is that we take some decisions that make the emissions actually worse than they were before. Just to give an example, China, which has had a relatively ambitious plan to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions by reducing use of coal, is now considering relaxing that as a way to promote economic recovery, which will be very bad for climate. So short term, yes, we have a good impact, let's say, on climate, but that is expected to be short term if we do not take the right decisions now.
Miguel, do you see, you mentioned the Chinese and the coal powered, do you see more governments relaxing their support for climate change because of the economic issues right now?
Officially, what you hear is no, they are not forgetting that climate change is a priority. However, in practice, the priority will be in the economic recovery, right? This is where the hearts and minds of the majority of the people will be. So what we have to make sure is that they turn the decisions that they're making to respond to the economic downturn are climate aligned. So officially, yes, they say it continues to be a priority. We need to see what the decisions are to be sure that they are.
Okay, thank you. Don, somebody has asked about a conference they have planned for October. They're specifically asking what point should they consider canceling the event. What's the general consensus in terms of how far out the cities right now have been canceling events? We've heard obviously through May, through June. In some cases, the cities are canceling events to that point, but in many cases, organizers themselves are canceling events a lot further out. What are you seeing overall?
That's a good question, since we're also in the process of determining the viability of our own annual convention, which is going to be in the second week of July in Chicago. I am hoping, and based on everything we're hearing, and again, I think it's all going to all be dependent upon when the scientific and medical community say it is safe to travel, and not until then do I think, we'll be back into the, quote, initial recovery mode. So I would say, we're hearing, again, based on the data and the calls that some of us have been on for the past couple of weeks regarding specifically the meetings industry, we are hearing that Q4 is beginning to ramp up. Summer is very slow, August, September, but it seems as though there's a confidence factor from the planning community to get back into a rebooking mode for the Q4. But again, I think there's another thing that's got to start playing into our booking process, and that is, for many of us, when we hold our meetings, people need to fly in. And I think right now we will be clearly at the mercy of how quickly the airlines ramp back up. And I know in certain markets their operations are, cut 60, 70, 80%. And if you look at, how quickly we'll choose to get back in certain markets, that will also dictate the ability for the planner to be able to get people to their respective destination. But everything we're hearing that Q4 is really the solid period for rebooking and meetings.
Yeah, I've got an event of my own first week of June that we're looking at moving. We've got another one in the middle of July that we think is probably 50-50 at best. And then SISO's own summer conference is the middle of August. And we're hoping that we can bring our sector of the industry back together again then. But as you say, Don, it's all down to testing at this point. So to answer a little more to the question there, the biggest question is sort of twofold. You've got the first part, if your audience can and wants to actually make it to the event is one question. The second is whether you can physically hold it, or even can you physically cancel it? Because right now I've talked to lots of colleagues who have events in July or even in June, and their cancellation clauses only give them, the force majeure only comes into play if the venue is closed or travel is closed. And in most cases, a lot of venues are still technically open past May or June. They haven't canceled events to that point. And also you have travel bans that in most cases aren't currently extended past May. So those are issues you need to look at internally and talk with the venues or hotels you're dealing with to find out what their timeline is for when they start looking at whether these are force majeure instances from that perspective. We have sort of reached the end of our allotted time, and I know there's an awful lot going on today, so normally I'd run a little late, but I have been told we need to keep right on time. So Liz, I'm going to hand it back over to you.
All right. Well, thank you all so much. I just want to say a big thank you from the Events Industry Council to our panel of experts today. It was such a thoughtful and engaging presentation. I know that I'm walking away with quite a bit, but I also know I'm standing between you and our next session. So just as a reminder, we did record this session For those of us who attended live, credits will be uploaded to your account within the week. That email address that you use to register needs to match what you have on your EIC portal account. However, if you didn't do that, don't worry. We'll send you an email after the session. You can upload that yourself to self-report. Just as a refresher, we do have some resources available to you about COVID-19. There is the link to our website there. And then last and finally, we have educational opportunities running through 8 p.m. Eastern this evening. The full schedule of remaining events is on our website at eventscouncil.org/GMID20. Thank you again for joining us today. I hope you have a wonderful rest of GMID.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Enjoy.